Why hello there, Brent here with Bring Your Own Tools. On today's episode, we are installing this beautiful rod railing for our deck. If you want to learn how to do it, keep on watching. Let's get started. In my world, there's nothing much better than working with a good quality product, and I know firsthand the quality of Viewrail because I've actually installed it in my own home. This, however, is a completely different system because it's an exterior system, and the really nice thing about these posts is the fact that they're actually going to be connected to the fascia board, or at least the rim joist board around the entire deck versus right on top of the deck, because if you put them on top of the deck, you're gonna lose square footage, and that's not what we want in this case. Also, they come with a bracket system that we actually mount to the rim joist first and then attach our posts after that. Makes life a lot easier than trying to commingle this thing into position before we get this thing fully installed. So let's get them installed.
With any railing system, the main key to think about is the spacing. When you have the product in hand, you want to personally make sure that everything's spaced out properly. And with this system, as I noted before, it's face mounted to our rim joist, and therefore we need to strike a line to determine the exact height all the way across. So after we have all of our brackets in place, they'll all be at the correct height. The first post that I try to determine the location for is my corner post, and this actually has a bit of variance depending on the spacing you want at this location. For our circumstance, the center of our post is approximately 4 inches away from the dead corner of the deck. As for the rest of our posts, the easiest way to determine the amount of spacing for the rest of them is to just take the overall length and divide it between the amount of posts you need. Just keep in mind that you want to make sure the span between post to post is no more than 48 inches. Our post spacing on this side was approximately 42 inches, which gave us plenty of stability and strength and made sure we were within tolerances. I grab my mounting bracket and line up the top of it with the chalk line that I placed earlier. Then I mark my 3 hole placement locations because I'm going to pre-drill prior to fastening. Now this railing system from Viewrail does come with through bolts, but it also comes with some lag screws. And the lag screws are specifically for the corners because these through bolts are just too long and will run into each other. The screws, however, will not and still provide plenty of support and stability. Once I have all 3 holes pre-drilled, I then fasten the top screw in place with the bracket and then fasten the second one and of course the third one. But just keep in mind that you want to keep them a little loose because you want to come back to it with your level, make sure it's perfectly level, and then tighten it down fully. You only have to tighten down the first top 2 at this point. The third one you actually want to keep loose. I didn't, but you'll see I'll be backing that out momentarily. As we make our way down the joist, we're now going to be installing our through bolts, but in some circumstances, I don't actually have backing behind our joist, and therefore I want to actually double it up to give it some more supportive strength, which is why you just saw that I fastened some blocking in first, then pre-drilled my holes, because that way I'm going through the blocking as well as the joist at the same time, and then coming back around and inserting my through bolts. Each through bolt does get a washer on both sides, but keep in mind, and a very important note, the one that's on the outside on the bracket is actually a nylon washer, as you can see in the top right hand corner, but the back one is a stainless steel washer. Make sure you account for that when you're installing, because if you don't, they are 2 different thicknesses, and after you have them installed, you'll quickly realize that the posts are not going in as smoothly as you'd like because the thicker washer is pushing out the head of the nut and therefore making it much more difficult to install your posts. I didn't do that correctly on the first couple, but I quickly learned my lesson. Of course, being so low to the ground did make things a little bit more challenging in some locations, but my impact driver did make things a lot easier, but just continuously check for levelness both from the side as well as the front, because if the fronts aren't level, that means your joist is not level, and therefore you need some type of adjustment with a shim. But luckily for us, our joists are very level and we didn't need shims on this project. As we make our way to the second side of our deck, it's the same exact process. Chalk line, mark our bracket locations, fasten our brackets in place, as well as making sure that everything is properly spaced out. Again, to determine our spacing, after I have my two end brackets accounted for, I then take the leftover space between the two, divide that span between the number of posts that I want to install there, and that's my spacing between posts, just as long as that span is less than 48 inches. On our third and final side, I am installing stairs at this location, which are going to be 48 inches wide, so my spacing here is going to be 46 inches. At this point in time, we have all of our mounting brackets stalled in place correctly, but before we slide on our posts, I do suggest tightening down our screws and bolts with a socket wrench. I'm personally surprised with how much I can tighten these bolts after I use my impact driver, but that's why it's so important to double check the tightness. I grab my first post and simply slide it into place, and the nice thing about this system is the fact that all of our hard work with determining the exact locations of our brackets was the hard part. Now it's all about sliding these into position or giving it a few love taps if they're a little tight. All of these posts are made exactly the same, so no need to figure out which post needs to go where. Once all the posts are slid in position, I then grab my trusty laser level and making sure that each one is at the correct height. Because if they're a little off or they need to be adjusted slightly, you can adjust it at this point because you can still move the post up and down approximately an inch. As for tightening these posts to the bracket itself, it's all about that third screw that we left loose. I'm using a ratchet wrench to just go back and forth in a very tight area, which actually made this fastening installation process very easy even though it was extremely tight. Hopefully, if you're installing this railing system, you don't have to be laying on the ground the whole time to try and get these installed, but it's comforting to know that as long as you have a ratchet wrench, you're easily able to do it. Now that we have all of our posts fully fastened down, it's now time for our handrail. But before we even grab our handrail, we need to install the bracket itself for it. This is a nice little double-sided bracket system for any type of handrail system, whether that be wood or aluminum, which Viewrail can provide either. Each one of these brackets is just fastened down with two screws on both sides, which secures the bracket in place very snugly. Once all of those brackets are installed, and those do install very quickly, we proceed to the actual handrail itself. I double check and make sure our end posts are perfectly level, and as long as they are, we can take our measurement. I take our measurement and then add about an inch past each bracket. Then I grab our aluminum handrail, and this is actually specifically called out as their beverage handrail that is aluminum with a black powder coat. I strike a line, tape off where I'm going to be cutting because I want to make sure we have as clean of a cut as possible because people will be dragging their hands across this handrail, and cut it to the correct length. However, we have an opening right here, but the system does come with a cap that all we have to do is hammer it snugly in place and we're good to go. Just try and make sure you're using a rubber mallet when hammering aluminum. Yeah. I position the bracket post in the dead center of our handrail, and once I like the positioning, I do clamp it in place prior to fastening. The fasteners that come with the kit are self-drilling fasteners, so we don't have to pre-drill our holes. It just takes a little pressure for these screws to penetrate the aluminum. The other nice thing about these fasteners is that they do come pre-powder coated, so we don't have to worry about trying to paint them ourselves or trying to match our beautiful black handrail. The order in which I would suggest installing the handrail is to install the two ends first, making sure that those are both perfectly level, and then going back to the center post and installing those, also making sure that they're perfectly level. Of course, our kit doesn't come with a 24-foot long railing span, which is why we have a butt-to-butt joint at the front of our deck. Just make sure you're centering each railing to the center of that post, then fastening it in. Luckily for us, there is a nice cover plate that we can place right on top. We also have a corner plate that fits perfectly on the ends, and you can also fasten each railing to the cap, solidifying each one in place. As we make our way around the bend to our final section of handrail, we install it quickly and easily and decide to wait the next day till we get to rods. Yep, today is rod day. And the first step, of course, is to take our measurement, and our measurement is actually from inside post to inside post. For this circumstance, we have a 78-inch span between inside post to inside post, and you have to add 1 inch to that mark. So we're going to be actually measuring out 79 inches and cutting all of our stainless steel rods at that location. There are a number of different tools that we can use to cut the stainless steel rod, but for this circumstance, we are using a 4.5-inch grinder with a metal cutting blade. As you can see, it makes quick work of this stainless steel rod, and the ends don't have to be perfectly beautiful because they're not going to be seen. The ends themselves are actually going to be on the inside of our posts. Once the rods are at the correct length, I take a deburring tool and go inside of each of the tubes. That way it cleans up the inside, and therefore we have a clean surface to insert our threaded crimp fitting. This crimp fitting is actually a really nice system because all you have to do is insert it into the tube and then crimp it with your crimping tool. This crimping tool is specifically designed for this system and provides the perfect amount of pressure on these rods in order for it to crimp perfectly onto this threaded crimp fitting. Once both sides are crimped, you then insert it into the end of your post and thread it through all the other posts. And as long as you measured and added that 1 inch, this system will perfectly fit. And there is a bit of leeway with the tension receiver that's attached to both sides of your rod. I tighten one side down and then the other and fully tighten the system together with a drill. Most of the time the drill works perfectly, but in some instances I did have to have someone on the other end holding an Allen wrench to hold it in place on one side while I also drill it securely on the other. Just keep that in mind if it's coming a little loose before it's fully taut. A little hidden feature within the post is actually the fact that it has foam in the post itself. As you can see, the rod pokes through and some of that foam pulls out when you do that, but you can just easily rip it off. But it's there because it actually reduces the amount of chatter, because once you actually push it through, it reduces the amount of movement and therefore reduces the amount of chatter that you're going to have if you hit these rods occasionally. It's just something that's a nice feature within the system that you would never think actually makes a big deal, but in the long run, it's these little things that count.
Okay, so the first section went in, the second section went in perfectly. Now the third section, however, since we have such a long span, we have to do something a little bit more unique because of the fact that we actually have to use a different insert. This insert, so it's actually double-sided, so you can actually insert it into one of these guys, then crimp it on both sides so it's evenly distributed, and then connect this section to that end post. So in any case, a little bit different, but we'll get it done and taken care of.
This section is quite similar comparatively to the last two sections we did, but the one thing you have to keep in mind is that we are accounting for two sections and therefore we need to add 2 inches. So the first section that we're going to be cutting is this first longer section. We do have to take that measurement from post to post, add 1 inch, and then cut the second section and also add 1 inch to that. And of course, the only other thing that you have to account for when installing this system is this first longer section does get 1 threaded rod and 1 crimp fitting in the dead center of our railing. The second rod that I'm inserting right here, it does get a threaded crimp fitting on this far side, but I don't attach anything to the other one because that one has to be attached to the double crimp fitting in the center of our railing. And also you do have to remove the tension receiver at this point because it has to go through past both posts, insert it into the double crimp fitting, then crimp that in place, thread it back through the post, and then attach the tension receiver on the far side. That's how the entire system goes into place, and it actually is a quite smooth process as long as you cut the rods to the correct length. I really do love the overall look of this rod system. It's stylish as well as it's extremely durable because it's stainless steel. The only thing you have to think about is because the fact that this is not a normal wire tension railing, this is a rod railing, and therefore we have some large rod spans. So if you have some tight knit areas, you might have to consider that, like this section right here. Luckily we have a open fence line and some woods beyond it, so we had plenty of room to work with, but we had to get creative to make sure we had all these rods positioned properly while installing the rod in one fluid section. You could do this with multiple crimp fittings, but personally that just adds time and energy, and I want to try and avoid that if possible. But if you're right next to a building, that would come in handy too. But now that we have all of our rods installed, I do go back around making sure that everything else has been accounted for, like an end cap or even the very bottom post caps. The bottom caps actually have this really nice professional drain plug where it actually drains properly if there's any moisture through there, but it also conceals all the hardware nicely so you don't have to worry about any rodents or insects getting into those beautiful posts. But guess what? Now that we have that accounted for, we are done. You've gotta love a system that provides so much beauty and style, but yet also provides strength and safety for anyone who is on this big, beautiful deck. Huge thank you goes out to Viewrail for their amazing product line. They provided all the materials for this entire project, and if you would like to check out this amazing system for yourself or any of their other amazing indoor or exterior railings, then I will make sure and leave a link in the description box below. But as you can see, this is one gorgeous deck that really needed something. Yes, a railing was needed. And now we have a railing, we need one more thing though. Can you guess what it is? That'll be coming up in the very near future, because this is truly one beautiful, sexy beast of a project that's oh so close to being done. Oh yeah.